Dave, you want to test your microphone for me?
Test, test, test.
Perfect, thank you.
Hello, Josh. Hello, family.
Hello. How are you?
Kicking and raring to go.
Me too.
And there's Tim. Hey, Tim. Hi. Super Dave's here. The Clerks, my favorites. Bill, Kelly. Wow. See, the problem with being on time, Josh, is there's no one around to appreciate it.
I know.
Michael Van Holst is here. Now it's a party.
I appreciate you here on time. Hello.
I'd love to be where you are, Michael.
Yeah, well, it's not as hard as you think, Ed.
Fantasy Island, I get it. Looks like a full house here.
Hello? Dave.
All right, I'll call the meeting to order. And welcome to the 11th meeting of the Corporate Service virtual meeting during COVID-19 emergency. City Hall is open to the public and with reduced capacity and physical distancing requirements. And meetings can be viewed via live streaming on YouTube and city website. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing, or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. And to make a request for any specific item on the meeting, for this meeting, please contact csc@london.ca. I will start with disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, we'll go to our consent agenda. Are there any items that council wishes to pull? Councillor Hopkins.
I think it would be safe to probably pull 2.1. I do have some questions and clarification, but might as well pull it.
2.1 are awesome. Can I get a mover and a seconder for the balance? Councillor Van Hol, seconded by Mayor Holder. Any comments or questions for item 2.2 and 2.3? Okay, seeing none, we'll call to vote. Are you ready?
Ready.
Councillor Van Holst?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer? You're muted, Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yes.
Mayor Holder?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
I vote yes too.
Sorry. I apologize. It's been a while.
It's Monday.
Closing the vote, the motion passed 6-0. It's Monday, so the brain is just a little slower today. Thank you. So now we'll go to item 2.1, Councilor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I've received a few questions about this recommendation that we are going to be bringing forward on advisory committees, and just wondering if we could have clarification on exactly what this recommendation is doing. So my first question would be that we are going to be allowing advisory committees to meet through telecommunication, and if that's going to be a permanent thing. And then also what advisory committees and what is the plan as we start to recover? How our advisory committees going to be meeting and what's their expectation? And I think there's some clarification that is needed. I know there's a lot of, will out there where people want to get back to meeting and being part of these discussions and part of the work plan. So through you, Madam Chair, to staff, if we can have some clarification on what this recommendation is going to be setting out.
We'll go to Kathy Saunders.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mrs. Westlake Powers has done all the work, so I'm not going to take credit for all the work that she's done on this. But at this point, since we're still in phase 2 of reopening, we anticipate to only hold advisory committee meetings where there is a legislative requirement for us to do that. And then once we get to phase 3, we would move into all of the advisory committees, either meeting in person with the separation distance or participate electronically.
So if I may, Madam Chair, through you, back to Ms. Saunders, then the legislative requirements would be for the advisory committees like Latch, and also the accessibility would be the first two advisory committees. But with the Recovery 3 process, would that include the rest of the advisory groups like EPAC, like the, there's a number of them out there, and what timelines are we looking at for those advisory groups to come back? And again, getting back, this will become permanent, this recommendation that we could meet through teleconferencing and or in person.
Through Madam Chair, yes. So we are looking at if there's a planning application that requires Latch, and for the members of the public, that's our Heritage Advisory Committee, to review planning application, then we would call a meeting specifically to look at that planning application or applications if there's more than one. And we would pull the Accessibility Advisory Committee together for a meeting if required. Again, those are our two legislative requirements. I'm not sure if Ms. Westlake Power had anything that she wished to add to that. And the timing for Latch would be, and Accessibility Advisory Committee would be, if those meetings are required after Council has considered this on June 29th. The phase 3 would be dependent on the health units recommendations and the province's guidelines as to when we hit phase 3.
Okay, so then we're really waiting for the advice from the health unit to make us go forward with the phase 3. And I know we can't say exactly what time the other advisory committees will be called back when needed, and sort of looking more into that phase 3 recovery. Is that the way it's going to work?
Through you, Madam Chairs, yes, that's the intent. And again, I would welcome Ms. Westlake Powers any additional comments, because she did the bulk of the research on this.
Thank you. And through the chair, an additional couple of notes that I'd like to add to what Ms. Saunders has stated already. The proposed amendment that's before you is not tied specifically to the COVID emergency, and that's by design. It's a little bit different than the procedural change that was enacted for council. So this would allow ongoing participation electronically of advisory committees with the consent of the clerk. So we have been approached from time to time about virtual meetings, and this would enable it with the clerk's approval. Mostly it's to address when convening an advisory committee is not possible or practical. So I wanted to make that note that this would be an ongoing change, but with some provisions to it. I've also talked to the support clerks for the advisory committees, and there aren't any pending items right now that are defined with any urgency. So that's just something else that I wanted to note for the committee's information.
Thank you. And again, in a way, by passing this, it is going to become permanent. There's no timeline on this recommendation.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. We'll go to Councillor Van Holst and then after Councillor Morgan.
All right, thank you very much. And through you, Madam Chair, welcome back, by the way. Through you to our staff, just a couple comments. I think this is great. Some of the challenges that we have with advisory committees were lack of quorum. Sometimes child minding was a challenge. And so perhaps this will make things run smoother for those committees. My question to you is just ask for an update on the report that was being done on the advisory committees. So we considered the possibility of reducing the number of committees, having them function somewhat differently. Could we get a quick update on that?
We'll go to Mrs. Wesley.
Thank you through the chair, and I'll invite the clerk to join me on this commentary if she'd like. The resources that we're going to that have been redirected at this time. So while we had hoped to be back to the governance working group before now, that work has been stalled temporarily. So I don't really have an updated timeline on that, but it will be as soon as possible.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Now, sorry. Go ahead.
I'm happy with this item if we don't have a mover yet.
Awesome. Thank you. We'll go to Councillor Morgan.
Yes, just stemming off of Councillor Van Holst's question, and more generally, first I'll make the comment that I'm very supportive of the recommendation before us, but given the review of the advisory committee's report, we're unsure on the timeline for it to return. Is there anything we need to do with the advisory committee appointments? I believe we made them for a 2-year period pending that report coming. Would they just automatically be extended as needed until that report comes forward, or are we going to have a bit of a gap that we need to do something with coming forward?
Thank you. Through the chair, we are not anticipating any requirement to extend at this point. Certainly, we would anticipate being back before council before the end of the year, and I believe that the current appointments go into 2022, so we should, no, excuse me, 2021.
Are there any, do you have more questions or comments, Councillor Morgan?
No, I'll just say thank you for the update, and again, I'm supportive of the direction before us.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions? Can we get a mover in a second? We need a seconder. We have a mover, we need a seconder. Councillor Hopkins, and we'll call to question. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 6-0.
There are no scheduled items. We have 2 items for direction. Now we'll go to 4.1, which is an application for issuance of proclamation for the Ontario FASD Action Network London branch. I'll put that on the floor. Is there a mover? Do we have a mover? Councillor Van Holst, do we have a seconder? Councillor Helmer, Deputy Mayor Helmer. Comments or questions? Councillor Van Holst.
Madam Chair, I'm actually happy to move both 4.1 and 4.2 if, unless the committee wanted to deal with those separately.
Does the committee want to deal with any of them separately? Mayor Holder.
Yes, I'd like 4.2 dealt separately.
Okay, so we'll start with 4.1. Are there any comments for 4.1, which is on the floor right now? Okay. Councillor Morgan, is your hand up because you want to comment or you just forgot? Okay, that's okay. All right, so we'll call to question. 4.1, and Councillor Van Holst,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer,
Yes.
Councillor Morgan,
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins,
Yes.
Mayor Holder,
Yes.
and I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 6-0.
Now I'll go to 4.2, which is the application of issuance of proclamation for the Institute of for the Research of Genocide Canada. I'll put that on the floor. Is there a mover or a seconder? Mover Hopkins, Councillor Hopkins, seconder, Councillor Deputy Mayor Helmer. Comments or questions? Mayor Holder.
I'll be consistent as I was the first time we reviewed an application like this. I have never challenged generally the cause of something that is worthwhile and legitimate. But when I look at standard terms of reference, this comes from a Hamilton organization, and as noble as the cause is, the connectivity to London, aside from the very moral sense of what these things may well be, isn't there. I will not support it, and I need to be consistent with not just how I position it, but as I have seen the rules that we've put in place through the clerk, which, by the way, doesn't. I want to remind colleagues, does not make a determination on these, refers them to us to make the determination. And saying yes to this is just a rubber stamp to me of all and any proclamations. So I'm going to suggest if this goes through at some point, I'm going to take it back to committee that we just rubber stamp all requests for proclamation. We don't even take it through committee unless they're most heinous of all proclamations, because there's no point. So I'll just leave that there.
Councillor Hopkins and then Councillor Van Holst.
Yes, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the mayor's comments. I know the importance of being consistent to how we vote. And I also understand that this is a pilot project. And with a pilot project, there's going to be some bumps along the road. And one of the things that we might need to look at is how, when applications should be submitted. So we have a policy in place, 6 weeks. This application came in less than 6 weeks. But I think we also know that this is the 25th anniversary of the genocide. We know other cities last year, Hamilton, Toronto, Windsor, all proclaimed the genocide. And this is a special year, 25 years. And I know, Madam Chair, when this happened, you were quite young, and I was older with 3 young kids. And this happened on our watch, this genocide. And it is something that we should never, ever forget. I know having 3 young boys, not only the slaughter of the Muslims in this area in Bosnia, but the misplaced children, there were many misplaced children. And I know a number of Londoners took in and adopted these children. I wanted to be one of those Londoners. I did not do that, but I am not Bosnian, I'm not Muslim, but I understand the pressures and the conflicts in Eastern Europe. And it is something that we should never, ever forget. And I know it is challenging, but sometimes we, with these proclamations, they can make us feel uncomfortable. But through that, we learn, we try to understand, we take opportunities not to forget. And I want to thank you, Madam Chair, for bringing proclamations to this committee and having these maybe sometimes uncomfortable discussions, but they're important. That's what we do. And I'm really pleased to be a part of that. I think it's something that I'm up for that challenge. And I'm very supportive of doing this. And as we go through this pilot project, I know staff are watching us and looking at how can we be doing a better job. And I'm looking forward to, after a year, reviewing all this and seeing where we are with these proclamations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. We'll go to Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I was willing to move this in the beginning because it seemed like, as the mayor was saying, we're just rubber stamping things. And I also noticed that this really had little to do with London. Definitely, if there had been time for another meeting, I would have said no to this and suggested that somebody come back. And I would like to see that people from our own community and not just council are interested in observing these things, that we actually see that this is the case. And these things could come forward from our own citizens even. And it's unfortunate when that doesn't happen. So, and I know people from that place, and I still think that I may side with the mayor on this, just to get us to a point where the applicants realize that yes, indeed, this has to involve these citizens of London. This is a proclamation for London, not a proclamation for other parts of Canada. Those are my comments. Whether or not I'll be consistent on this vote, I don't know.
Thank you, Councillor Van Holst. I will go to Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I will just mention that there is a Bosnian Islamic Center here in the City of London. And I do not think it is hard to imagine that there are many people in the community who would support observing this day of remembrance of the genocide. So, perhaps between now and council, I will endeavor to reach out to the folks at the Bosnian Islamic Center and see what they think about the proclamation. Perhaps it will persuade some members of the committee or council that it is something that is supported in the community. I frankly do not have a problem with organizations that are outside of the City of London who are engaged in particular issues, reaching out and doing the paperwork of raising the issue of a proclamation. I do think, and we've certainly had this experience, that when there's a local organization doing the advocacy and asking for it directly, it's very clear. And in some cases, when it's an outside organization, we had this before with the Limb Loss Awareness Month discussion, that it was not necessarily clear, and we had to do some legwork to figure that out. And so I'm happy to do that. I think that there is support, which is why I am quite comfortable supporting it. Unfortunately, this is an event that touched many people all over the world. And the diaspora from the Bosnian Muslim community is quite large. So, I'm happy to support it now, and I will endeavor to reach out to the Bosnian Islamic Center and let people know what I hear from them.
Thank you, Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much. I think it's very noble the Deputy Mayor wants to do that. I would ask the organization who's responsible for this, and I say this respectfully even to the deputy mayor, why don't you challenge them to, instead of you doing their work for them, and I know this, see, I'm not challenging the nobility of this, and I want you to understand, when I have disagreed with this before, is because they have not made the effort to determine if there's a London connection. And I would feel better to all of the committee if you have an inclination to reach out to the individual and ask them to do their work for them, not for us to do their work for them. And it's not because we wouldn't support this, but I mean, our rules are really clear about the connectivity to this community. And sure, if any of us can go back, I recall when we had the issue relating to amputees. Oh my God, we know people who are amputees. Why doesn't that organization reach out and do their work for them instead of us? That is not our job. Our job is to approve it on its merits, based on local connectivity. We say that here. To me, it's very clear. So, I mean, look, we can do whatever we choose to do, but it strikes me that as meritorious as the cause may well be, when we enable by doing the work versus the organization that has gone to the effort, it's very easy to splash out requests to communities right across the country. It's a little more work to reach out to their own community to see that it really matters in their community. I believe it does. But I think it's incumbent on the organization to do that work, not council.
Any other comments or questions? Councillor Van Holst.
Sure. And I would maybe add to one point is that groups that you would assume are supportive of each other that's not always the case. So again, I think in this instance, I'll vote with the mayor, and of course we'll see the response that the deputy mayor gets, and then I'll adjust my vote accordingly at the council. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, I will add some comments on this. So I think that this we'll eventually get to a place where we're going to be able to see, next year, we're going to review how the proclamations have worked and how accessible they are to our community. And we can talk about the timeline being a barrier. We can talk about, how a lot of services that we do offer sometimes are not really well communicated, and it's not very advertised in the community for people to know. I have had different members of the community reach out to me, and some of the things that are in the policy have been a barrier to some groups that don't have a specific group in London. I'm not saying that this specific one doesn't have a community here in London, but there have been people who have applied through outside communities because they're more organized than the local communities here in London. So I won't support not voting for it just because this specific application came from someone who lives in Hamilton, because if we can understand some of the barriers that are in the policy, and which we'll have an opportunity to review next year and see how we can make it better and more accessible to the entire community of London. And we can talk about, the timelines, organized organizations, and whether they have articles or not, and different ways that people can apply through this policy. And we can then talk about some of the barriers that we're seeing and enable the community. And then also the communication piece as well. This hasn't been really well communicated throughout the entire community, that it's available and people can use it. I still get many questions around proclamations, and especially the timeline. The 6-week period is a huge barrier to a lot of organizations that sometimes are small organizations that are trying to do other things and do other work and do not have the time to come up with a 6-week timeline. But we will review that. I will be supporting it. I do understand that it does cause a problem to some committee members that it's an application from Hamilton, but it is very tied to London. It's very connected to London. So I'll call to vote. Councillor Van Holst.
No.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
No.
I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 4-2.
Thank you. So now we'll go to our deferred matters, additional businesses, and we have 5.1 and 5.2. So we'll start with 5.1, which is the standing committee meetings and annual meeting calendar. I'm sure committee has had time to review it. Can I get a mover and a seconder? Mayor Holder, seconded by Deputy Mayor Hummer. Comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll call to question. Councillor Van Holst? Okay.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer? Councillor Morgan?
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yes.
Mayor Holder?
Yes.
I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 6-0.
Now we'll go to 5.2, which is a second report of the county city liaison. Can we get a mover and a seconder? Councillor Morgan, moved by Councillor Morgan, seconded by Mayor Holder. Comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll call to question. Councillor Van Holst?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer?
Yes.
Councillor Morgan?
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yes.
Mayor Holder?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 6-0.
Thank you. We'll now move to our confidential section of the meeting, and we will adjourn after. So, yeah, we won't resume the stream. We won't be back online, basically. So, I'll have a mover and a seconder to go into closed session. Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Van Holst, and we can do a show of hands for all in favor. And that motion carries. Thank you, everyone who's watching from online. We will see you at the next corporate service meeting.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 6-0 to move to closed session for the 2 reasons on the public agenda.